Everybody, welcome to Get Live with Dracaena Wines. Today I am going to be talking about YAN, which is yeast assimilable nitrogen, and it is a very important aspect to wine making. So we're going to start off with, when we go to fermentation, there's a couple of things that we really need to pay attention to. So, the temperature is heating up, and before we know it, harvest is going to be here. And after the fruit comes into the winery, it's time for that all important and all beloved fermentation to begin. That process that converts those sugars in the grapes to the alcohol that we all enjoy so much. So this is going to happen, but there's a certain couple of things that we really need to pay attention to make sure that fermentation goes through properly. Okay, one of the worst things, the worst thing that you can say during fermentation, like if you're at a craps table, you don't say 7, right? Okay, well, you don't say stuck fermentation, okay? Because we don't want any of those. So there's several factors that play a role in making sure that the juice is fermented to dryness, and that way we are avoiding that stuck fermentation. And the first thing is that temperature is important. And what the temperature does is it regulates the rate of fermentation. So when it comes to temperature, right, it is a true Goldilocks situation. Too high of a temperature can inadvertently affect the metabolism of the yeast and lead to increased dead yeast cells. It also can increase the amount of esters and increase the alcohol levels. And then too low of a fermentation can really result in slower fermentation rates, and to the point where they just peter on out. Now, red wine fermentation typically occurs at a higher temperature than white wine does, right? So red wine is typically around an 85 median, right? So we have that range, okay, 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is awesome for the tannin extraction and higher temperatures. But when we get too high, we can actually kill off the yeast. So we need to pay attention to that. Now, the lower fermentations of white wines, kind of median around 65 degrees fermentation, right? These will slow down the fermentation rate, and what this does is it helps to preserve the aromatics. So we have to play with the temperature to get the desired effect that we will want. So while the temperature is an important aspect, the nitrogen level is just as paramount. It is common practice to add diammonium phosphate, which is known as DAP, which is a nitrogen source to the juice and the must at inoculation, in order to guarantee that nitrogen levels during the fermentation are okay. So, but we don't just want to dump the nitrogen in, because it really does matter how much nitrogen is available. Because we have to keep in mind that grapes naturally contain nitrogenous compounds, such as amino acids, peptides, ammonium ions. And these all are what come together to give us that yeast assimilable nitrogen, or that YAN. So this is also known as fermentable nitrogen. What nitrogen is available to those yeasts to allow them nutrition to go through the fermentation process. So the concentration levels vary depending on the grape variety, the vintage, the microclimate. Every year we can't just create a formula, because every vintage and every grape variety is going to be different. So this is the nitrogen, right, that these yeast are going to use in their metabolism so that they can continue to ferment. Now, there are a few ways that wineries can choose to just find out how much nitrogen they have in their, must and juice. And really, there's two basic ways. We have an enzymatic assay kit that we can just purchase, or there's a formal titration. So the titration method requires basically adding a base to neutralize the juice, and then you're going to add back that acid or formaldehyde to retitrate it to your end point, right? So obviously those kits are a lot easier. But what you're looking at right now, this is an HPLC. So this is, if you're in one of those snazzy wineries, or AKA wineries with money, then you are going to have one of these in here, and it's going to regulate it for you instantaneously. And this machine here is an HPLC, or a high performance liquid chromatography. So as I mentioned, YAN impacts the speed of fermentation. If the juice has a low beginning YAN, then concentration, it will be a very sluggish fermentation, okay? So what's happening is when the yeast begin to consume the sugar, okay, during fermentation, their numbers are also increasing. This is known as the growth phase. So by the end of the growth phase, their nitrogen levels have become depleted. So we might want to add some of this nitrogen, add the YAN addition at this point, and it will reactivate their protein synthesis, and thus increasing that rate, speeding that rate up of fermentation. When fermentation occurs with the low YAN, then what happens is, in addition to a risk of stuck or just sluggish fermentation, there is actually a higher likelihood of an increased amount of hydrogen sulfide production, which is going to be a fault in the wine, as well as an increase of long-chain volatile fatty acids, okay? And these are going to be off aromatic, so the wine is not going to come out the way we want it to, okay? So if fermentation occurs with excessive amount of YAN, right, we've added too much, or we didn't pay attention to how much naturally was in there and we just dosed it, right, then the yeast may fail to consume it all, and this then is going to impact the flavors of the wine, but more importantly, it's going to impact the stability of the wine, and we're going to end up into trouble of having a stable end product. So as I said, it's kind of, up to the winemaker when they want to add it. It is a debated issue on when we should add the nitrogen. Some winemakers are going to add it all at one time, while others are going to space it out throughout the fermentation process. They might put a little bit in at the beginning, and then like a third through fermentation, and then maybe 2/3 through the fermentation, okay? This is kind of just another aspect of how the winemaker can put their art into the process of winemaking. So the timing is an individual decision. And again, we can't just have a regular formula, because it's going to change vintage to vintage and from grape variety to grape variety. So YAN, or the yeast assimilable nitrogen, this is extremely important in the role of winemaking. So I hope I made that very science geeky concept into a little bit more understanding for you. And thanks for joining in Get Live with Dracaena Wines. And if you have any topics that you would like me to talk about in one of these Get Lives, please just leave a comment and let me know. Head over to the website, dracaenawines.com, and check out some other posts that are there about some other winemaking things that is behind the scenes. And if you go to our website, you can check out events of all the things that are happening. We are going to have a very, very busy September and October, so head to the events page and see if you can join us for one of our special events. In the meantime, thanks for joining, and head to the website, purchase some wine, and to enjoy the rest of the summer. Amazing rosé and Chenin Blanc for the warm weather, and we have our, of course, classic Cabernet Franc. So let me know what you want me to talk about next week, and I will see you all then. Sláinte!